Hey everyone, it's Ben Hardy here, and in today's video, we're going to be going over car journalists and whether or not they're actually paid off by the manufacturers. With that being said, before we get in the video, I do want to mention if you want to save time and money the next time you purchase a car, link to my car buying guide in the description down below. Let's go right into the video. So I recently posted a video on the new Rivian R1T, and I titled the video, "Is the R1T as good as paid off journalists claim?" And of course, that video got a ton of funny comments, and most of the comments were basically circled around to people saying, yeah, we're so sick of these paid off car journalists saying that every vehicle is the best vehicle ever, and we wish that we could just get like honest opinions on vehicles. And so that's what kind of prompted me to make this video, to kind of basically explain everything in the car journalist world for you guys. So yeah, I'm just gonna dive into it. So I think the best way to explain this whole thing is to break journalists up into different tiers. So you have the entry-level tier, and this is where people are just starting out. And so they probably have like a small YouTube channel, maybe they have their own website, but they're only posting a few reviews per month or per year perhaps, and they don't have a large viewership, and they don't exist to automakers. So they're getting cars from like family or friends, or maybe some local dealerships are letting them borrow cars for a little bit of time. But again, they don't have a massive audience, and so they don't exist to automakers, and so it's impossible for these people to be paid off because, again, they don't exist to automakers because they don't have a big enough audience. And typically people within this range either make no money or they make just a small amount of money, not enough to live off of. And then you have the next tier up, and this is where most journalists actually live. And this is the tier where automakers do know they exist, and they potentially send these journalists cars every so often, and they potentially take them out to events as well, but they don't pay these people whatsoever, right? They're just giving them cars, access to cars for free, and they're taking them out to events for free, but they're not like directly giving them any sort of money. And like I said, this is where most journalists live, and so they get access to cars. And again, there's still a lot of people that are in this tier that just have this as like a hobby. It's like a side gig. It's not something that makes them a massive amount of money. It's usually something they do on the side where they have to have like a full-time job to, support themselves, basically. And so I guess that, if you're looking from the outside, you could say that these people are somewhat quote unquote paid off because they're getting cars to drive for free, which is one of the biggest expenses in life. And so that, is not directly paying these people, but it is kind of indirectly paying these people. And because most of these people just in this tier work with only the automakers, they, basically live and die by the automakers. So if the automakers decide to stop sending them cars, then they can't do their gig anymore. And so then they kind of have to be nice to the automakers to continue to get cars. Hopefully that makes sense. And so again, in this tier, they're not technically like paid off directly, but they are paid off in the sense of, hey, if you say bad enough things about my car, I'll never send you out cars again. And so, right, you can see where there could be a little bit of bias from these journalists. And then especially on the event side of things, right, if this journalist gets flown out and they have everything paid for, right, they go to this nice event where they stay in a nice hotel room and they have all this food given to them and everything, right, then again, that's not directly giving them money, but it's giving them an experience to where when they write their article or make their video, it better be a good article or good video in terms of like good press on that car, because the automaker just spent maybe hundreds or thousands of dollars on that individual person. So again, it's not direct, but it's kind of indirect. Now, you have the next tier of journalists, and this is typically where it's going to kind of be like a whole company type thing because it's big enough. And so you'll typically have companies that'll basically have journalists underneath them, and they'll either write articles or, in today's world, make videos. And they get a little bit of an extra perk that the other journalists don't get, and that is that they get long-term loaners from the manufacturers. So the journalists in the tier down below will sometimes get invited out to events, and they'll get cars for a week at a time, whereas journalists or companies in this tier, they'll get cars lent out to them for months at a time, sometimes even a year. And so they're basically getting all of their transportation covered for a year's time period. And so again, you guys got to understand, even though the manufacturer isn't paying them directly, they're saying, hey, here's this car that you're going to be able to drive for the next year instead of having to drive your own car. So we're basically covering your car insurance, car payment, all that kind of stuff, not gas. Typically people will have to pay for their own gas, but still, right? That's a huge life expense that's being covered. And so these people are quote unquote more paid off because again, they're not directly getting money from the manufacturer, but they're getting a car for a long enough period of time that it's as if they're getting paid in a sense. And so again, you guys can see there could be a little bit more bias with that. And then you have the next tier up, and this is where things get a little bit dicey, but there is some direct paying to certain outlets or certain people within certain situations. Now, it's not like this continual thing where someone's basically on payroll with a manufacturer. It's more like, hey, here's this car, and here's some little bit of money on the side so that you write, what we want you to write about this particular car. But this is reserved for pretty much like the largest outlets, right? They're not going to, some people that are the largest outlets are individuals, but they're typically not going to do this for individuals. This is going to be large companies that they're, giving a little bit of money so that they say the right things, right? And this is kind of an interesting situation because it's slowly starting to fizzle out a little bit from what I've heard, and it's kind of going more towards basically advertising, if that makes sense. So basically the way to look at it is, in the past, right, it would have just been like, hey, here's some money, say some good things about our car. Whereas now it's like, hey, we want to have several sponsored articles or videos, whatever it may be, and we're going to pay you a certain amount for those videos, but you can show people that this is like sponsored content. And it seems like that's kind of more of the norm in today's world, is they're kind of pushing more towards that way so that it's a little bit more transparent. But the biggest thing you need to understand about this top tier is, yes, there is potentially, the direct transfer of money rather than just access to cars like the other tiers. So to come full circle, most journalists aren't paid by automakers, and they aren't paid whatsoever, right? They just do car journalism as kind of like a side hobby, but they are kind of indirectly paid because they're getting cars sent to them for free. And then sometimes, if they're in a high enough tier with the automaker, then they're getting cars sent to them for extended time periods where they have their transportation covered, right? So it lowers their overall cost of living. But here's what I have to say as, someone who views car content. What can you do? Here's the deal, is individuals are typically going to be more honest than companies, because companies are ultimately profit driven, right? It's a company, they have people work for that company, and so they want to make sure that they make the most amount of money possible. And so from a journalism perspective, if a video or an article is coming from a large company, right, there's a higher chance that there's going to be some bias there, because there's a higher chance that they're getting paid directly from the automaker. And frankly, they've also been, typically these companies have been around for a lot longer, and so they just have these really deep relationships cemented in with these automakers. And so it's just like a, hey, you scratch my back, I scratch your back type situation. But that doesn't necessarily mean that individuals are always going to be the most honest, like I said, because some individuals nowadays are getting paid out directly by automakers. I've heard several stories of that happening. And so again, there is kind of like a little bit of a gray area. But, and this is not just because I do YouTube videos, why I'm saying this, I think that YouTube in general is the most honest source for automotive journalism at this point, because YouTube videos aren't as tied to the manufacturers as a lot of these articles are, because a lot of the people that are still writing like articles like that you actually read are fully tied in with the automakers. They get all of their cars from automakers, and like if they don't get cars from automakers, they can't make a living. Whereas people that are making these YouTube videos are not only buying cars because YouTube is so much more lucrative, there's so much more money to be made in YouTube, they're buying cars themselves, so they're giving more honest reviews because they actually own the cars, but they're also getting cars from other sources that traditional journalists don't get cars from, right? Like what I do, dealerships, and with channels that get to a large enough size, they start having subscribers, say, hey, come and review my car, and so on and so forth. And so because the cars are coming from multiple different sources, the information is a lot less biased. Because if someone gets a car from a manufacturer, right, then that means that, they don't want to run the relationship with that manufacturer, because then they won't get any more cars from that manufacturer. But if someone just goes and reviews their friend's car, right, they can say whatever they want. Maybe their friend will get a little bit upset about it, but, that's a completely different situation. Or if they go to a dealership, right, and they don't necessarily say the best things about that car, maybe that dealership won't let them have review cars in the future, but then there's probably other dealerships that sell that same brand that they could go to. So the point that I'm trying to make is that because these cars are coming from different sources, there's a higher level of honesty, right? And so I would say that, you know, if I was someone that was looking for like the most unbiased opinion on a vehicle, at this point, YouTube and individuals within YouTube, and then I would kind of dive into individuals that focus most of their content around cars that don't come from automakers, rather cars that come from sources outside of automakers. So that's pretty much going to sum things up for today's video. Hopefully that kind of enlightened some of you guys about the industry in general. And I know it might seem like I'm just giving a biased opinion to watch my YouTube videos since I make YouTube videos, but like I said, I have talked to so many people within the industry and I've seen a lot of things. And so at this point, from what I've seen so far, it seems kind of like that's the general trend. And another person that's actually talked about this that you guys all watch as well is Doug Jamiro. He's talked about, right, the events that these car companies will hold and the car loans that people get and all this kind of stuff, right? He's talked about that. And you look at his channel, right? Take my channel out of the equation, you look at his channel, and most of the cars he films on his channel, now they do come from car manufacturers, but a lot of them originally were from friends, family, dealerships. And so you guys can see, right, how like it's led him to be able to build this business that's not biased like what you see with other publications out there. And so, yeah, that's going to sum things up. I'll see you.